Now it's time to set up some asteroids for our player to actually shoot at. So these things could be flying around. We could break them up into smaller pieces, and it'll increase our score every time we hit them. I'm going to go over to project, go to my sprites, and then let's start with, let's see, we want the large one because we want to take the large one, shoot it, and then break it into smaller pieces. So I'm going to drag and drop this large one in here. Okay, you can see large is like just bigger than our ship, and then medium kind of gets a little smaller, and then small is about the size of our ship. Okay, just so you could see those sizes. So essentially you could do the same thing. They're all the same shape, right? You could do this with any sprite and then just change the size of them. So there's always that to keep in mind. What we could do is we could take this asteroid and then go to our prefabs folder and drag and drop this in here. So now we have a large asteroid prefab. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. And then in our large asteroid prefab, I'm going to double click this, select it, and we're going to go to the Playmaker editor. Now, besides coming over here to the add component button and then typing in FSM and then clicking this, you can also select a game object, and then you can see that our Playmaker editor says right click to add FSM. So I can right click and add FSM. Okay, so that's another way you can add an FSM. You can see that it got added over here. We're going to set up some logic here, and then in a moment we're going to turn it into a template that we could use with the other asteroids, right? So we can have like we can have a medium and small asteroid as well. So the first thing that I want to do is just make sure that this thing is moving in a direction and that it's spinning in a direction. Okay, so the way we could do that is vector to random value. Okay, so this will be used for setting a random velocity for this. Okay, because our velocity is going to need a vector 2 value because it needs to know how fast it's going to be moving both on the x and y axis, right? So this is going to give that value to us. So we can say that our minimum length is, so this minimum length and maximum length are going to be our minimum and maximum speeds. So we could just say that our minimum speed is 0.1 and then our maximum speed is 0.5. Okay, and then we'll store that result as our new variable that we'll just call velocity. Okay, and then what we could do is set velocity 2D right after that. Okay, so we can set our asteroid's velocity with that vector that we just made, velocity. Now here's the thing, it's saying game object requires a rigid body 2D component. That's because we haven't added that yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and click to add the component. It has a rigid 2D component on it now, but it doesn't have the collider that's necessary for it. So let's go ahead and put in the edge collider 2D. Okay, and that way, if we take a look at this, we'll be able to see this. So you can see it's just it's just flat right now, right? We could come in here and we can add some points. So I can click this green line and just sort of line it up with this. I can even take this one, put it down here, tracing the shape of it. Whatever your shape is, you don't have to get exactly to this point, but I'm going to connect these 2 points, and then I'm going to bring this in like right here, like that. Okay, so now I can see our shape. You can barely see it, but if I turn off the sprite render, you can see the shape. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to turn that back on. So that's going to be the shape of it. It has a rigid body. We're going to change our gravity scale to 0, right? We don't want this falling down. We want it to float around. Okay, so now that set velocity is working. It doesn't give us that little warning anymore, right? And this basically should be all we need for floating asteroids. So if I come out here and just take, by the way, I'm just gonna make this main camera. I'm gonna zoom it out. So I'm gonna change this value to like, let's just say 10 for now. And then I'm gonna just drag and drop some of these asteroids into the scene. So like this. Put one right there, one right there, one right there, just to test this out. So when I press play, great, they're all sort of floating in a direction. That looks good. So what we want now is for them to have a little bit of a random rotation to them. So let's add that to it. I could double click right here on the asset to go and start editing the prefab, but you'll also notice that if you put prefabs into the scene, that there's also this little arrow button here that you can click. So all these prefabs have an arrow button that if I click it, I go inside the prefab. Personally, I don't like to do this as much because you sort of set yourself up for editing a prefab in a way that's like it'll sort of unsync it from the rest of the prefabs, and then you have to start keeping track of whether you're making changes to the prefab in the scene or if you're making changes to all of them. Because if I just start making changes to this thing here, like if I change this scale, right, notice the rest of them don't change. This overrides button up here, if I say apply all, that's when the change happens to all of them. I'm just going to undo that really quick. But you'll see that if I made the change inside of it, like this, and then I head back out to the scene, that all of them end up changing, right? Because when you make the changes inside the prefab, that's when they get sort of universally applied. Now, that nice little sort of synchronization happening can end up not working as well if you start tinkering with things out in your scene like this. There's a handful of rules that will decide whether or not all the things or one thing changes, but that's for another video entirely. The recommendation I'm making here is that we just keep this. I'm just going to save that. We just keep this clean by not even putting them in the scene. Okay, so I'm going to remove these and I'm going to do all my editing here. So I go in here and selecting my asteroid. What I want to do now is add the little random rotation to these. So the way I'm going to do that is put in a random float. Okay, and this random float is going to be between -15 and 15. And this will be our rotation. Okay, and then I'm going to put in a add torque 2D right after that. And the torque we're going to set as our rotation that we just got. That should be pretty good. That's all. I think that's all we need. So if I go back out to the scene and if I drag a few of these in here, we should now see that they have a bit of a random rotation to them as well. Great. You can see how this one's spinning a little more slowly than this one. That one's spinning in the opposite direction as these two. So this is just a nice little way to break that up. The other thing that's going to be happening is these will just keep floating off screen, right? We haven't applied the screen wrap logic to them. So this one's just going to go and that's it. We'll never see it again. So what we could do is hop into our asteroid and then over here we can go, and when this is done, I'm going to add a finish transition, send off to another state where we put in our screen wrap. And again, we could just leave that as is. So this first state, we can say movement, and then this one we could just call this screen wrap. Okay, so now when I press play, I could bump into these at least, right? Could push them along, help these move, right? So that one's going to go off screen, and it should pop up from over here now. There we go. Okay, so this is all working nicely. And if I push this one up, it should pop up from down here. Okay, great. So now let's make it so that when it gets hit by a bullet, it will get destroyed. So I'm going to hop into the prefab, and in here I could just right click, add global transition, custom events, hit by bullet. Okay, so the easy thing, like I did before, right, was when we did a little test on our spaceship, you can just put destroy self, so it just goes away. So now when I play this, you should see that when the bullets that I shoot out of here, if I just like that, it just disappears, right? It destroys itself. We will do that, but instead of doing that, first we'll add a couple of other steps in between. So I'm going to take this action, I'm going to drag it out into this, into the editor, and I'm going to drop it into an empty space so it creates a new state, right? So this new state just destroys it here. Now, in this first state, when we first get hit by the bullet, what we're going to do is check, is game object null? Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to check if a variable is empty or not. And the variable we want to check for will be a new variable that we can call smaller asteroid. Okay, and if I go to the variables tab and select the smaller asteroid, what I could do is I could select this input value. So if I check this, it'll expose it over here. And so now this is a value that we can, first of all, just see a little bit more easily as we're editing things. We can just take a glance and see what this value is, especially if we're going to be making several of these. We want to see, instead of having to get inside the FSM, go to the variables tab and then select this and then see what the value is, we could just glance at our large, medium, and small and see that over to the right in the inspector, the value is just exposed right here. So it's a little easier to find a value that we're going to be looking at a few times. Other thing is that we're going to be making this into a template that we're going to be applying to other game objects. So right now we have this applied to the large asteroid, right? We made this one game object, right? So this FSM as it is right now is fine. What if we wanted to apply the same logic to another prefab? Well, you could come over here and right click and then copy component and then go over there and then paste it into the other prefab for the medium and for the small. But every time we make a change on this FSM on one of them and we want to make that change on the other ones, we have to go back and make that change on all of them or copy and paste it all over again. So instead of having to do that every single time, what we could do is make this FSM into a template. it's kind of like the prefab. So the thing is, this prefab, remember, we can have this asset in here, this asteroid large, and it's just like, it's this every single time, right? We can have a bunch of these. So prefabs and FSM templates are similar in that way, in that there's a thing that is sort of the baseline template of it, and then we could change the specificities, and then each one of those things could be a little different in very specific ways that we decide. So inside of this, if I go over to our FSM, right, this is the asteroid FSM that we're working on. I'm going to call this FSM asteroid, so I'm going to name it first. And then I'm going to come over here to the editor and right click and then save template. So now we are saving this in our assets, Playmaker, templates folder. Okay, so all your templates become a file, and this is the folder that we're going to be putting them in. You could put them wherever you'd like, but this is probably your best option. So I'm going to call this our asteroid template. Okay, so if I hit save, it's asking me, use this save template. Use save template in this FSM. Yes, I want to use that. And now you can see that over here in this FSM, yeah, it's still named asteroid, but below it, it also has a value here that says asteroid FSM template. That means that this FSM component here is using this template. Okay, this little ... lets you navigate and find other templates if you add more later on. So now when we want to edit this asteroid template here, it says click to edit template. It doesn't expose it right away. And this is a nice way of reminding you that, hey, actually what you're editing doesn't just exist here on this asteroid. When you edit this, you're going to be changing it everywhere that it exists. This is a little sort of like little safety precaution when it says click to edit template. It reminds you, hey, you're about to edit a thing that exists in multiple places. So click to edit template is fine. We're going to move forward and continue working on this because we do want to put this in a couple of other places. So this asteroid, it's going to be checking if smaller asteroid is null or not. Null just meaning empty, non-existent, just like a nothing, right? So when it says none, that would be considered null. Okay, so we can create logic based off of whether or not there is a value in this smaller asteroid, slot. Why would we want to do that? Because here's the logic, is that if you start with a large one, right, then that means what you could do is if I come back over to our project, go to sprites, and let's make sure that we're back out here in the hierarchy. If I drag and drop a medium out here, right? So we have a medium one and we have a small one, right? So we have our medium and small, right? Big, medium, small. Then I go to our prefabs. If I drag and drop this medium in here and then this small in here, if I go to our medium, I can select it and I can come over to Playmaker, right click to add FSM, use template, and then we could select our asteroid template. And you can see it also has a smaller asteroid here as well, right? So for these two, if I save this, if I come over here to our large asteroid, the smaller asteroid for our large is the medium, okay? And then if we go to our medium, the smaller asteroid for our medium is a small one. Okay, and then if I go to our small one, and we also add that same FSM, use template, no category, asteroid. For the smaller asteroid, there is no smaller asteroid than the small asteroid. So we leave this as blank. We say null, right? And in that way, we can come in here and click and edit our template. We can ask, has smaller, okay? You can ask that question. And then what we could do is, if it's null, that means the answer to that is no. So you could say no. Okay, we can add that transition. If it's not null, that means there is a value here. Then the answer to has smaller is yes, right? If you're asking, hey, does this have a smaller one? Well, if there is something there, then the answer is yes, okay? So if there is nothing, then it could just come here. And that's where this destroy self can live, okay? So I'm just going to put that destroy self in here. So has smaller, no, goes here, and here's where it says destroy, okay? But if the answer to has smaller is yes, then it comes here first where we create smaller. And then when this is done, this destroys itself, okay? So when we do the create smaller thing, what we could do is just pop in a couple of create objects, okay? So we'll just create two instances, two clones of whatever the smaller thing is, right? So the game object that we want to create is a smaller asteroid, And where we want to create it, the spawn point for that smaller asteroid should be exactly like right here, basically, where the asteroid is, right? Because it's kind of trying to sell the illusion that this one bigger one is being broken up into smaller ones. So you can imagine the two pieces coming out like from right here and from like right here. The spawn point, you'd think that you could just go like this here, drag and drop it, right? But look what happens. I get this menu instead, and it just gives me options to put in actions, right? That's not what we want. And the reason it's doing that is because, remember, right now we are editing a template. And so templates, because they're assets, there's no way that they know how they're being used. There's no way that we can make direct links to the places that they're being used on, right? So I can't just drag and drop this here because this template doesn't always know that. So the way that you get around this is that in spawn point you make it into a variable instead, and then you say this new variable is this asteroid, okay? And then if we go to this asteroid right here, we can say that that's an input as well, right? And then now that's how we can specify things, right? That's also why we did it with smaller asteroid. If this wasn't a variable smaller asteroid and we just used one of these, it would be whichever one of these. If I set it to medium, that means the larger one is going to spawn a medium, the medium one's going to spawn a medium, and the smaller one's going to spawn a medium. And that's how it's going to be all the time. But instead, because we're using an input variable for just like the concept of smaller asteroid, right? That's relative to whichever asteroid it's using. And it's being told that like the spawn point for this asteroid is, we can just drag and drop this in like this asteroid, okay? Now there's another way you could do that. You can also say that this isn't an input variable. You could turn that off, and instead you could do this programmatically, where right at the top, at the start of everything, you can just put in like an extra state here and say set a start state. We'll call this init for initialization, and we'll say that when it's finished, then it kind of continues doing what it does. But the first thing that it does is it gets itself. So we could put in a get owner action, and we'll say that, hey, I am this asteroid. Okay, get owner means get the owner of this FSM, which is the game object that it's on, and it stores that value as this asteroid. So now when we create smaller things, the spawn point that this smaller asteroid gets created at, the spawn point is this asteroid. It gets spawned like right on top of wherever this is, right? I'm going to delete this one just because it's going to be nice to just go copy, paste, right? So now that just happens twice. So it'll create two smaller asteroids before going to destroy itself. Now, basically, this should work for all of them, even though we've been doing this work from the smaller asteroid one. You'll see that when we go to our medium one, if we click to edit template, all the logic's the same, and this logic applies to everything. The only thing that's different here is what its smaller asteroid is, right? The medium one, the medium asteroid, its smaller asteroid is the small one. And then, I mean, just in case you're not following, right? Go to large and look at that. Playmaker, edit this, and look at that. The smaller asteroid for a large is medium, right? It's all relative. So this should work. We should be able to, first of all, let's just get rid of some of these. Let's delete these, and we're only keeping large in here. Okay, so I should be able to shoot that, and shoot that, and shoot that. Look, it turns into smaller ones. And the thing is, right now, the other ones don't have any rigid bodies on them. They don't have their colliders on them. And it looks like only one, but you'll notice that these are actually really bright because they're stacked on top of each other. Look at that. Each one of these, there's actually two. And so they looked a little extra bright because they were sort of doubled up on top of each other, right? So all we got to do now is come over to our prefabs for the medium and say that we're going to add a edge collider on this and a rigid body 2D on it, okay? And we could just put the shape in here like we did last time. So it'll go like this, that, and just make ourselves a quick shape like that, okay? And then we'll just turn off the gravity, and I think that's looking pretty good. We can go over to our small one and do the same thing. I'm gonna do rigid body 2D, and then do a edge collider 2D, change that again, put this right here, here, like this, okay, and then turn off gravity for this one as well. So now let's give that a test. Okay, so I could shoot that, okay, that, that, and then shoot that one. Look at that, and it gets into smaller pieces, and they just keep getting smaller and smaller. Shoot the medium one, it's into two smaller pieces like that. Okay, and then this. Right? Okay, looking good.